The wind howled across the cracked earth, carrying dust that stung like 1,000 tiny needles. The sun hung low, a blood-red smear against a sky the color of bone, and the air smelled of scorched sage and despair. In the center of the makeshift corral, where the townsmen gathered like vultures around a carcass, stood a woman. Her name was Abigail, though no one spoke it. Her dress, once blue as a summer sky, was torn at the hem, caked with mud, and clung to her thin frame like a shroud. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, the fibers cutting into her skin, and her bare feet bled onto the dirt. She stood motionless, head bowed, her dark hair falling in tangles over her face, shielding her eyes from the leering crowd. The auctioneer's voice grated like gravel underfoot, calling out bids for her life as if she were no more than a heifer or a plow. The town of Bitter Creek was a place where dreams came to die, tucked in a valley between jagged hills. It was a cluster of sagging shacks and saloons that were warped by years of heat and neglect. The drought had lasted 3 years, turning fields to ash and hearts to stone. Abigail's husband had been one of the first to succumb, his body left unburied in a dry creek bed after a fever took him. She had tried to hold their homestead alone, hauling water from a dwindling well, coaxing life from barren soil. But the land betrayed her, as did the men who came afterward, promising help and delivering only theft. Her livestock, her tools, her dignity all stripped away. Now, here she stood, the final piece of her existence bartered for a sack of grain. The auctioneer's hammer struck the wooden block, and the bidding began. A rancher offered a rusted plow. Another, a jug of whiskey. A third, with a leer that made Abigail's stomach churn, tossed out a sack of grain. The crowd murmured, a low, hungry sound, and she felt their eyes crawl over her, weighing her worth. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs were lead, her throat dry as the earth beneath her. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her lids, she saw her mother's hands, calloused and gentle, kneading dough in a kitchen long gone. The memory was a knife, sharp and fleeting, cutting through the numbness. A new voice broke the clamor, low and steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. I offer my heart, it said. The words hung in the air, strange and heavy, silencing the crowd. Abigail's eyes snapped open. At the edge of the corral stood a man, tall and lean, his face shadowed by a weathered hat. His coat was patched, his boots worn thin, but his posture was unyielding, like a lone pine standing against a storm. The auctioneer laughed, a harsh bark, and demanded coin or goods. The man stepped forward, his spurs jingling softly, and repeated, "My heart, and my horse." He gestured to a bay mare tethered nearby, its ribs visible but its eyes bright. The crowd jeered, but the auctioneer, sensing something in the man's gaze, hesitated. Abigail's breath caught. She did not know this man, this cowboy who spoke of hearts in a place where such things were traded for dust. His eyes met hers, briefly, and in them she saw something she had forgotten, kindness, raw and unguarded. It terrified her. She had learned to trust nothing, to expect only betrayal. Yet here he was, offering what no one else had. Not ownership, but salvation. The auctioneer, impatient, demanded a final bid. The cowboy untied his mare and led her forward, her hooves kicking up clouds of dust. "Take the horse," he said. "She is worth more than your grain." The crowd muttered, some in scorn, others in awe. The auctioneer, swayed by the mare's strength, nodded. The hammer fell. Abigail was his. He approached her slowly, as one might a wounded animal. His hands, rough but steady, cut the ropes from her wrists. She flinched at his touch, expecting cruelty, but he only stepped back, giving her space. "You are free," he said, his voice soft as the wind before a rain. She did not believe him. Freedom was a word for other people, other lives. But as he turned to lead her away from the corral, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a fleeting, golden light, and for the first time in months, Abigail felt the stir of something like hope. The cowboy led Abigail through the dust-choked streets of Bitter Creek, the mare trailing behind her hooves a soft rhythm against the hard earth. The town's eyes followed them, sharp and judgmental, but the cowboy paid no mind. His name, he said, was Elias, spoken in a voice that carried the weight of years spent alone. Abigail walked beside him, her wrists raw from the ropes, her body aching from hunger and exhaustion. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and distant rain, a promise that never came. She kept her gaze on the ground, counting the cracks in the dirt, afraid to look at Elias, afraid of what his kindness might demand. They reached a small camp at the edge of town, where a fire smoldered beneath a blackened pot. Elias gestured for her to sit on a blanket spread over the ground, its edges frayed but clean. She hesitated, her body tense, expecting a trap. He did not press her. Instead, he knelt by the fire, stirring a thin stew of beans and wild onions, the smell rising like a memory of better days. Abigail's stomach growled, betraying her, and she sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the mare's soft snorts as she grazed on sparse grass. Elias handed her a tin bowl, the stew steaming in the cool evening air. She took it, her fingers trembling, and ate slowly, each bite a battle against the shame of needing. He watched her, not with pity, but with a quiet patience that unnerved her. She wanted to ask why he had bid for her, why he had given his horse, why he looked at her as if she were more than a broken thing. But the words caught in her throat, tangled with memories of her husband's promises. Now ashes in the wind, her mind drifted to the past, unbidden. She saw the homestead, its fields green before the drought, her husband's laughter as he carved their initials into the barn door. They had been young, foolish, believing the land would hold them forever. But the drought came, and with it, sickness. He died calling her name, his voice weak as a dying breeze. She buried him alone, her hands blistered from the shovel, her heart hardening with each clod of earth. The men who came after, neighbors, then strangers, took what remained, leaving her with nothing but the weight of her own survival. Elise's voice pulled her back. "You do not have to stay," he said, his eyes on the fire. "I meant what I said. You are free." She stared at him, searching for deceit, but his face was open, weathered by sun and sorrow. He spoke again, softer. "I have lost things too. I know what it is to be left behind." His words were a mirror, reflecting her own pain, and she felt a crack in the wall she had built around herself. He told her of his own loss, Susan's sister taken by fever, a home burned by raiders, a life spent wandering the frontier, chasing redemption in the wide, empty spaces. His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, clenching briefly as he spoke of the sister he could not save. Abigail recognized that gesture, the way grief lived in the body, unspoken. For the first time, she felt the urge to speak, to share her own story, but fear held her silent. Trust was a luxury she could not afford. The night deepened, the stars sharp as knives overhead. Elias offered her his bedroll, saying he would sleep by the fire. She shook her head, insisting on the ground, her pride a stubborn thing. He did not argue, only draped the blanket over her shoulders. As she lay there, the earth hard beneath her, she listened to the fire's dying pops and the mare's gentle breaths. The world felt vast, indifferent, yet Elias's presence was a small anchor in the dark. She wondered what he saw in her, a woman worn to nothing, auctioned like chattel. Did he see the girl she had been, singing hymns in a kitchen, or only the shell she had become? Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of dust and loss. When she woke, the sky was gray, the air heavy with the scent of coming rain. Elias was already up, tending the mare, his movements deliberate. He looked at her, a question in his eyes, and she realized he was waiting for her to decide stay or go. The choice loomed like a canyon, vast and uncharted. She stood, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, and took a step toward him, her heart pounding with the weight of possibility. Asterisk. The morning air was sharp, heavy with the promise of rain that never fell. Abigail stood at the edge of Elias's camp, her bare feet sinking into the cool, cracked earth. The horizon stretched endless, a blur of brown hills and gray sky, indifferent to her existence. Elias was saddling the mare, his hands steady as he tightened the cinch, but his eyes flicked to her, watchful, waiting. She felt the weight of his gaze, not demanding but searching, as if he saw something in her she could no longer find. Her fingers curled into her palms, nails biting skin, anchoring her against the urge to run. She had nowhere to go, no one left to turn to, yet the thought of staying, of trusting, felt like stepping off a cliff. Elias spoke, his voice low, blending with the rustle of sagebrush. "There is a town 2 days' ride west. Good people there, or good enough I can take you, if you want." He paused, brushing dust from the mare's flank. "Or you can walk away now. I will not stop you." His words were a door swung open, offering freedom but no map. Abigail's throat tightened. Freedom was a word that had lost its meaning, twisted by years of loss and betrayal. She wanted to ask what he gained from this, what price he expected, but the question died on her lips. His eyes held no hunger, only a quiet resolve that made her chest ache. She thought of the homestead again, the memory rising like a ghost. She saw herself at 17, standing in the doorway, her husband's arm around her waist, the world bright with promise. They had danced under the stars once, his boots scuffing the dirt, her laughter echoing across the fields. But the drought came, and with it silence. The land turned hard, the laughter faded, and when he died, she buried that girl with him. Now standing in Elias's camp, she felt the ghost of that girl stir, fragile and unwelcome. To hope was to risk breaking again. Elias mounted the mare, his movements fluid, practiced. He extended a hand, not reaching for her but offering, palm open. "Ride with me," he said, "just for today." The simplicity of it disarmed her. Not a demand, not a promise, just a moment. She hesitated, her heart a war of fear and longing. Then, slowly, she took his hand, her fingers cold against his warmth. He pulled her up behind him, and the mare shifted under their weight, steady and sure. Abigail's arms hovered, unsure, before settling lightly around his waist. The contact was foreign, intimate, and she fought the urge to pull away. They rode west, the land unfolding in waves of dust and stone. The mare's hooves kicked up clouds that stung Abigail's eyes, but she welcomed the distraction. the rhythm of the ride, the creak of leather, the warmth of Elias's back against her chest. It grounded her, tethering her to the present. She noticed small things, the way his shoulders relaxed when the mare found her stride, the faint scar on his knuckles, the smell of sweat and earth on his coat. These details felt like anchors, pulling her from the abyss of memory. At midday, they stopped by a dry creek bed, the stones smooth and white as bones. Elias shared his canteen, the water warm but clean, and they ate hardtack in silence. The wind carried the faint howl of a coyote, a lonely sound that echoed in Abigail's chest. She wanted to speak, to ask about his past, his pain, but the words felt too heavy, too raw. Instead, she watched him tend the mare, his hands gentle as he checked her hooves. He caught her gaze and offered a small nod, not a smile but an acknowledgement, as if he understood the war within her. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of fire, Abigail felt a shift, not trust, not yet, but a loosening of the knot in her chest. Elias was a stranger, yet his presence was a quiet rebellion against the cruelty she had known. The choice loomed closer: stay with him, risk vulnerability, or walk alone into the unknown. She thought of the auction, the men's leering faces, the sack of grain that had nearly claimed her. Then she looked at Elias, his silhouette sharp against the fading light, and felt the stir of something new, fragile as a seedling in parched earth. It was not hope, not yet, but it was enough to keep her on the mare, riding west toward a town she did not know. The second day of riding brought a sky heavy with clouds, their edges bruised purple, yet still no rain fell. The land stretched, harsher now, a sea of cracked earth and jagged rocks, with mesquite trees clawing at the air like skeletal hands. Abigail clung to Elias's waist as the mare picked her way through the terrain, her body swaying with the animal's rhythm. The ache in her limbs had dulled to a constant hum, but her mind churned, caught between the weight of yesterday and the uncertainty of tomorrow. Elias rode in silence, his back a steady presence, his breath even under the strain of the sun. She wondered what drove him, this man who had traded his horse for her freedom, who offered kindness without demand. The thought gnawed at her, sharp as the hunger in her belly. They stopped at noon beneath a lone cottonwood, its leaves brittle but casting a frail shade. Elias slid from the mare, offering Abigail his hand. She took it, her fingers less hesitant now, though her heart still raced at the contact. He spread his coat on the ground, a makeshift table, and shared what little remained: strips of dried meat, a handful of shriveled berries. She ate slowly, savoring the tartness, her eyes tracing the lines of his face. His jaw was set, his eyes distant, but there was a softness in the way he broke the meat, offering her the larger share. She wanted to ask about his sister, the one he had lost, but the words felt like trespassing on sacred ground. A memory rose, unbidden, sharp as a blade. Abigail saw her mother's kitchen, the table dusted with flour, her hands small and eager as she shaped dough beside her. Her mother had sung then, a hymn about grace, her voice steady even as the world outside grew hard. When consumption took her, Abigail had been 12, left with a father who drank himself to death in a world that cared little for a girl alone. That kitchen was gone, burned by raiders years later, but the hymn lingered, a ghost in her chest. She hummed it now, faintly, the sound escaping before she could stop it. Elias turned, his eyes catching hers, and for a moment, the air between them held something fragile, unspoken. He spoke instead of the town ahead. Willow Bend, a place of honest folk, he said, with a church and a doctor. You could start again there, he said, his voice steady but careful, as if testing the ground. Find work, a roof. The words were practical, but they stung, implying an end to their journey together. Abigail's chest tightened. She had not realized how the rhythm of the mare, the quiet of Elias's presence, had become a tether. To imagine parting felt like losing the homestead all over again. Yet to stay, to lean into this stranger's kindness, was to risk a deeper wound. The afternoon wore on, the mare's pace slowing as the terrain grew rougher. Elias pointed to a ridge ahead, where the first signs of Willow Bend appeared, a cluster of rooftops, smoke curling from chimneys. The sight stirred both dread and longing in Abigail. A new start meant facing people, their judgments, their pity. She thought of the auction, the men's voices bartering her worth, and her hands clenched, nails digging into her palms. Elias noticed, his gaze lingering, but he said nothing, only urged the mare forward. As dusk settled, they camped by a shallow stream, its water cold and clear. Elias built a fire, the flames casting shadows that danced across his face. Abigail sat across from him, the stream's murmur filling the silence. She felt the crossroads looming, a choice she could no longer avoid. To trust Elias was to open herself to pain, to hope, to the possibility of being seen. To walk away was to cling to the safety of solitude, a life she knew too well. She watched him tend the fire, his movements deliberate, and saw the scar on his knuckles again, a reminder of his own losses. He had survived them, carried them, yet still offered her this moment, this fire, this choice. The stars emerged, sharp against the night. Abigail stood, her shadow long and wavering, and stepped toward the stream. She knelt, cupping the cold water, letting it slip through her fingers. It felt like a baptism, a shedding of the dust that clung to her soul. She looked back at Elias, his face lit by the fire's glow, and felt the hymn rise again, soft and steady for the first time. She let it linger, a thread of grace in the dark. The dawn broke over Willow Bend, a thin light spilling across the valley, catching the rooftops and turning them gold. The town was small, a scattering of clapboard buildings huddled against the wind, with a church spire piercing the sky like a quiet prayer. Abigail sat behind Elias on the mare, her arms loose around his waist now, the rhythm of the ride familiar but heavy with finality. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, a faint promise of life after the drought. Her chest ached with the weight of the choice she had not yet made, each hoofbeat pulling her closer to a decision: stay with Elias, risk the vulnerability of connection, or step alone into this new place, carrying only her scars. They stopped at the town's edge, where a dirt road led to a general store with a faded sign. Elias dismounted, his boots stirring dust, and offered his hand. Abigail slid down without taking it, her feet steady on the ground, though her heart wavered. She looked at the town, its windows glinting like eyes, and felt the old fear rise. Fear of being seen, judged, reduced to the woman auctioned for a sack of grain. Elias stood beside her, silent, his presence a quiet anchor. He had not pressed her for answers, not last night by the stream, nor this morning when she woke humming her mother's hymn. His patience was a language she was only beginning to understand. He spoke now, pointing to the church. The preacher there, he is kind, he will help you find work, a place to stay. His voice was even, but his eyes held a flicker of something, sorrow perhaps, or hope. Abigail nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to ask what he would do, where he would go, but the words felt too big, too raw. Instead she followed him into the town, the mare trailing behind, her reins loose in Elias's hand. The streets were quiet, a few townsfolk glancing their way, their faces curious but not unkind. A woman sweeping her porch paused, her eyes softening as they met Abigail's. It was a small gesture, but it stirred something in her, a memory of community, of belonging. They reached the church, its white paint peeling but its door open, a warm light spilling from within. Elias stopped, turning to her. "This is where I leave you," he said, his voice low, like the wind before a storm. "You are strong enough for this." His words were a gift, but they cut, implying an end. Abigail's hands trembled and she clenched them, fighting the urge to reach for him. She saw the scar on his knuckles, the weight in his eyes, and knew he was letting her go, not because he wanted to, but because he believed she needed it. A memory flashed: her husband's grave, the earth hard under her hands, the silence after the last shovel of dirt. She had survived that, and the theft, the auction, the betrayal of the world. Now standing before this church, she felt the crossroads sharp and clear. To stay with Elias was to risk her heart, to let someone see the broken pieces she had guarded so long. To walk into Willow Bend alone was to choose safety, but also isolation, a life of walls. She looked at Elias, his face steady but open, and felt the hymn rise again, its notes a thread connecting her past to this moment. She took a step toward the church, then stopped, turning back. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The auction, your horse." Elias's gaze softened, and he looked away, toward the hills. "Because I saw you," he said. "Not what they made you, what you are." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through her. She wanted to say more, to tell him of the girl she had been, the woman she might still become, but the moment held its own weight. Needing no more words, Abigail turned toward the church, her steps slow but sure. The mare snorted softly behind her, and she heard Elias's boots shift in the dust, but he did not follow. As she reached the door, the light from within warmed her face, and she paused, her hand on the frame. The hymn was still there, soft, in her chest, and she let it linger. Outside, the wind carried the scent of coming rain, and the first drops fell, light as grace, on the dry earth. She did not look back, but she carried Elias's words with her, a quiet flame in the dark.